if that's his approach, that means he's letting everyone make their own decision. So you'll have liberals in some places that right away will say, oh, okay, all you folks that have been sinning aren't sinning anymore. Never were, you're okay. And that's like a big change. And then, but the conservative ones, who definitely are in conservative countries where that's been more strictly upheld, then, oh, yeah, no, that's still wrong. So basically, that creates havoc, dogmatic havoc in the church. And you end up then with kind of a split, which has happened before at several different times, schisms in the church. To add to it, of course, Benedict is still alive, and strictly speaking, popes don't retire, even though he did, and as a result is now ex-Benedict. It's not my fault.
It was a good pun. It was nice.
But he's the strict one, right? So, and he's still there, and it's like, what's he, biting his lip? What if he comes out of retirement and says, that's terrible, Padawan, learner, to the current pope? That could cause schisms, which has happened before too. Never good. Never good. So that's all. And then you've got Ross Douthat. I think I mentioned his book, To Change the Church. Yes? Mm-hmm. And he's a conservative coming in and saying, well, this is bad news because the Pope is basically following an Arian heresy, which is like, oh, what's he going to do, become Mormon next? I mean, that's a contemporary example of the Arian heresy also. So that's Ross Douthat. And this is the document that Ross is upset about.
Institution in the West, the Roman Catholic between marriage and communion.
Did we watch this last?
To receive communion, the Catholic Church teaches that a Catholic must be in a state of grace. And what does that imply for the divorced and remarried Catholic?
Nothing with absolute certainty, in the sense that the Church does not claim to have an X-ray machine that can tell you the exact situation of any given soul. But the Church tries to set rules based on reasonable general premises. And the reasonable general premise is that if someone is, again, in a state of what counts as public adultery, they are not able to do what you're supposed to do before you receive communion. They're not able to go to confession and confess sincerely and promise essentially to do their best never to sin again. Because if you're in a second marriage, you're clearly not planning to, sort of do your best going forward. You're staying in the marriage. So that point, combined with a concern about what the Church calls scandal, basically the idea that a public act like receiving communion, to do that while you are in a publicly adulterous marriage, is to sort of teach against the Church's own teaching. That combination explains why the Church has said people in such second marriages should not receive communion.
All right.
Which doesn't mean that they don't. Right? I mean, again, anyone...
to that.
Right.
So now we have Cardinal Casper. Sorry, there's a lot of setup here, but a Catholic myself.
Cardinal Casper, by the way, is referred to as Casper the Friendly Cardinal. I'm not kidding. It's true.
I am quite certain that
Everyone's
there are a lot
familiar
of
with
bits of
Casper
this
the
that I
Friendly
had.
Ghost.
That's right. This is there because of this. We need a little refresher course here.
By the
Long
way,
time
it's
since parochial school.
K-A-S-P-E-R.
So Cardinal Casper, now he's speaking at the Vatican in 2013 at the invitation of Pope Francis, and Casper says, quote, "In the name of mercy, the Church should allow divorced and remarried Catholics to receive communion. Close quote. Why should that be even remotely controversial? Mercy, Ross.
Because, again, there are sort of specific questions about the mercy issue, right? Which is, to begin with, mercy for people in one situation may not be mercy for people in another. It's possible to argue, I think, reasonably that for the church to essentially sort of accede to the divorce revolution is to abandon the children of divorce in many cases, to tell them, oh, even the church doesn't take your parents' original marriage seriously anymore. And it's potentially to abandon people who are currently struggling in their marriages and are looking to the church for solidity and reassurance and so on. So those are sort of cases against the it's just mercy argument. But ultimately, from the point of view of the church, those are secondary, right? The ultimate issue is that mercy cannot be opposed to truth and to the church's obligation to tell people the truth about their situation. And so if the church is telling people it's fine to receive communion, to take the body and blood of Christ, which St. Paul says in his letters, if you receive it unworthily, you drink damnation upon yourself. So for the church to say, don't worry, you're worthy, to people who have not gone through an annulment process, have not taken steps to essentially assure themselves and assure everyone around them that their original marriage was not in fact valid, that's a failure of the church's basic obligation to take care of souls, their souls and the souls of the community around them. And it's a shift that means that the church wouldn't really have a teaching on indissolubility anymore, right? It becomes a situation where the church says, okay, we have this law, it's on the books somewhere. It says that marriages are indissoluble because Jesus says so. Of course we still believe in that. And Cardinal Casper would say this too. If you were here interviewing him, he would say, nothing in this proposal challenges the indissolubility of marriage. But the fact is, if the church both has a generous annulment process and says, if you can't do the annulment process, say a few prayers, go to confession, express some contrition for your first marriage's failure, and then proceed in good conscience, then that rule is just on the books, and it doesn't exist in reality.
Bill Cosby can still go to confession.
Since the 60s, we see Latin Mass tossed out, the number of annulments.
So you get the idea. It's almost time for class to start. That was pre-class, because it's not 6 yet.
That was my daughter calling. She wanted to know if I could order Domino's pizza.
So it was very urgent, so she had to call
Yeah,
twice.
very important.
With
told her
pepperoni?
no. Yeah, pepperoni.
Did you order it?
No. She wanted me to do that last time. I said no. They're probably going to have a sleepover tomorrow, and I'm going to say no. Which will turn into a yes, but
Eh. Well, because you'll be home, so you'll be benefiting from it.
They should just learn how to make pizza on their own. It's not really that difficult.
well,
Well,
I
you should-
cheated. I bought a DiGiorno's pepperoni pizza.
No, that
Get
that
them,
is,
get them a Lunchable. It's the pizza Lunchables. It's like $1.50, $2 at the store.
there's actually really good pizza out there that you could buy in the store and just pop in the oven for
Mm-hmm.
20 minutes.
$7.99.
So the church is still an exciting institution, depending on.
Oh, they also reinstated, if you have a couple that are married, and one is Catholic and the other one's not, their children are not going to be baptized into the church until both couples are Catholic.
Well,
That's something the old Pope did.
yeah, I married Donna in the Episcopal Church to get around that loophole. The Episcopal Church was fine with anything. They are still because it's a democracy. And so as the people change, they vote and change the way the church behaves on things. Although the biggest issue with the Episcopal Church is the majority of Episcopalians or Anglicans today are not Northern European first world people. It's actually become a fundamentalist church, predominantly African, which is kind of interesting. And then, of course, those people vote too. You can see the interesting problems that the church ends up with. And by the way, that's where the Lutheran Church is now too, because a few years ago they unified the two of them, so that the Lutheran Church didn't continue to disintegrate, because it was dying out. Because the mainline Protestant churches are decreasing, whereas the fundamentalist churches are growing. And we might just flat out say that's because, in general, there's fewer intellectuals that are members of the church, and the number of non-intellectuals are growing, and they're much more prone to accepting fundamentalist beliefs, which is why Harold Bloom argues that the main two American churches are the Southern Baptist and the Mormon, LDS. And by the way, both of them are actually pagan, not really Christian, because his interpretation is that the higher intellectual church is the real Christian church. So that's kind of intriguing. What we're looking at tonight will be mostly William of Ockham and Duns Scotus, both of whom are high abstract scholastic members of the church. Make sure I did turn that on, right? So Duns Scotus first.
Do you mind if I close the door?
Please do.
Yeah.
I'm just getting a little annoyed.
Yes, you could. If you have a rubber band gun, you could shoot them.
I would, but I feel like I'd get in trouble.
Well, you have to make sure you get them right here.
And it has to leave a mark. They have to know.
Yes.
They have to literally know what hit them.
Yes. Because sometimes you're just like, what was that?
Uh-huh.
I want them.
It's funny, but I just finished reading the book Ready Player One last night, and that was because Kat and I watched the movie a couple of weeks ago, and it was an okay movie. Mostly kind of like shooty-shoot, exciting, fast-paced, car races, blowing up things.
Keep a teenager's attention span.
Yeah. The old Japanese monsters fighting one another, all that kind of stuff. I read the book and discovered that the book was totally different. Instead of fast-paced racing and shooting one another, instead he was playing Pac-Man, which, that would not have made nearly as exciting a movie, using the old Pac-Man to make sure he ate all the fruit. That's how he won the key, I don't know if you've heard about the movie or not. It's very popular right now. Big hit movie-wise. I guess the book is quite popular, but no, they're like, what? How did this? But the Artemis is the character in the book and the movie who's really the real hero in a lot of ways. And she zaps a lot of people with her rubber band gun in the head. That's not really a rubber band gun. She blows an awful lot of IOI stormtroopers, out of. She does that in the movie too. So that's fun. We did have significant women in the Middle Ages that we talked about. Hildegard was the one I especially mentioned, Hildegard von Bingen. We played some of her music. I don't know if you saw it on the videos, but her music is still very popular. And as far as I know, the music that you listen to when you hear those songs is actually the music she wrote. Although if they add like modern instruments to it, that's a real clue that that's not from the 1100s. If it's electric guitar, the electric guitars they had in the Middle Ages were made out of screaming cats, you know. You know, they didn't have a eclectricity, as Mr. Weasley pronounces it. By the way, my wife's favorite show lately is Father Brown, who's actually, I always see it and it's like, yeah, that's Mr. Weasley, because he's dressed up as a priest and riding a bicycle and solving crimes. It's the Father Brown Mysteries. Never heard of them? Yes, yes, Father Brown Mysteries. Ooh, full episode. Oh, this is like the whole thing, isn't it? I just wanted to show you. That's not him.
The broom pennant actually flew in Palestine during the Crusades.
Mouth open. Ready? You.
That's a different one. Oh, here he is.
It's your Catholic day.
You don't act like the man from the stories of...
See? There he is. Mr. Weasley. Sorry. That was a squirrel.
Shoot the squirrel.
However, let's go to Duns Scotus. And actually, let's do that too. Because you've heard of the Duns Cap. Yes? Images? You've heard of those? They don't use them anymore in schools. But that was what the Dunsmen, the followers of Duns Scotus, used to wear. Although they were all black, and they weren't that high. They were smaller and roundish. Let's see if they got any real pictures of them. No. Let's go and find a real picture of. So there. That's the way it usually appears. So it wasn't really pointy. But still, the odd thing is, and the other thing that's really changed totally the opposite way is Epicurean. You know, when you see Epicurus, what he recommended was bland, safe, regular foods that won't make you sick and won't be weird, but it will keep you nice and healthy. And then when you go and you see things, they have Epicurean delights, and they have the weirdest things on the dish, and you're like, what the heck is that? So it's completely flipped. And in fact, the last symphony concert, they were trying to sell a raffle to an Epicurean festival or something, and and I, looking at this, and it's the weirdest, expensivest foods that are. That's totally the opposite of what Epicurus would have been advising people. Well, the dunce cap was a mark of intelligence, because his followers were the the bright ones, the brightest ones, the most strict logicians, and of course how it eventually became the cap that they would put on students that they sat in the corner because they misbehaved. How did that happen? I have no clue how that might have happened. They did make fun of the duncemen the way they do intellectuals. You know, you can't understand what they're talking about. They think, boy, what the heck were they talking about? The duncemen knew, and they were right, and you know, everyone that couldn't understand them, those were the dumb folks in the room, unfortunately. You don't find that insulting that in any room you have there are really smart people and really dumb people. It's like, you know, even in the case where you've got a whole bunch of Princeton mathematicians, you know, some of them are John Nashes and Newmans and others, you know, and the rest are people like me, you know. You know. So, you know, that's human nature. That's the nature of the pyramid, and it's not necessarily an insult, even though it's admitting that there is a hierarchical structure associated with that. However, so Duns Scotus. You know, this is absolutely wonderful. Oh, this is Occam. Did I get to Occam, or how did I pick Occam instead of? So let's go.
You clicked on the different tab.
So we'll just go. So Duns Scotus was, as far as I understand it, he was actually from Ireland, but the people referred to everyone that came from Ireland and Scotland as Scots. So he wasn't from Scotland. Now let's see if I'm right. Well, it says he's from Scotland.
Duns County.
Somehow along the way, I remember hearing that even if you were from Ireland, anyone out over that way was referred to as a Scot. So, but I don't know how that works. But all of his work was in Europe. And in fact, his tomb, which I just recently discovered, is in Köln, in this church. Which is in Köln. It's not one of the bigger churches there. In fact, it comes to mean the minority church. I don't know what the heck that would have meant in that case. Here's a Denkmal, which it's not Scotus, but a Denkmal is a memorial. Literally, it means a think piece. Noch einmal Bier, bitte. I'll have another beer, right? Please, right? Einmal, one more, right? And a think. I mean, German sounds to me like English with a German accent. But I've discovered a lot of people don't know what the German words are automatically. That's just befuddles me why that is the case, because it seems so obvious. Adolf, that's not him. That looks like it, but it doesn't say. Isn't that weird, though, that they have all these tombs in the places? But I want his image. Yeah, see, that's it. Duns Scotus. So you could actually light a candle in honor of Duns Scotus. But he's not a saint. never heard of him as referred to as a saint. But blessed means, well, it's pretty cool. Not as super cool as William of Ockham is only William of Ockham. No special. So, and if you're into Latin, this says John. Let's see. So Johannes Duns. It looks like a V, but that's just the way they do a U. Duns Scotus. See, there's the U. And I can't make out the rest. Oxon. I don't know. What it's. However. But so, let's look at his dates. So he's been beatified in 1993. That's why he's blessed. He's not actually a saint yet. But they're still waiting on a few more miracles, I guess. It's kind of hard to imagine.
Wait, so like they could still give him the title of saint?
Yes, you could still be sainted. It doesn't depend on how fast you get it. There's no like UAA will send you you're no longer allowed to sign up because you've been a student for too long. You know.
We've been waiting on your miracles for too long, buddy.
Yeah.
Time's up.
But yeah, I've never heard that there's like a time limit. You know, it's like, you know, if someone calls the Vatican and says, I had an ingrown fingernail and I prayed to Duns Scotus, and the next day it was better. And I went to the doctor, so there's a picture of it, and the doctor said, there's nothing I can do for you, but the next day it was all better. And so the church will say, well, now that's a verified miracle, and we only needed 3. Yes! And then they'll have like a special ceremony where they'll ask Duns Scotus to lay down on the, well, he's dead. But they'll he's a Saint Duns Scotus now, so they have to reprint all the holy cards for Duns Scotus. They can charge more for the candles at Köln, so that you go and pay your respects. It's a business, it's how that works.
I guess I didn't realize that you could still become a saint even though if you've already passed.
Don't most saints receive sainthood after they've passed?
Yeah, you're not a saint while you're still alive. Like, I mean, who are the ones made saints just this year? The newest saints. What do you think?
I guess in my head that just seems like I understand maybe once you've passed closer to the time of death rather than 2018, and it's still possible, and you've been gone for so long.
Right, like within 6 months of passing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I feel like there should be a time period.
So here's the list. The
it starts
newest.
with 7.
Well, I mean, these are the
Pope
latest.
Francis, though.
So yeah, the latest one that I heard was Pope John Paul II, who died in. Well, that was the year that Benedict became Pope. So that was 8 years plus 5 years, so 13. So that was 2000 something. So that's really fast, actually, for someone to become a saint. Notice the 23rd. I believe he's the one that was a friend of the fascists and signed the deal with Mussolini so that the Vatican got its own place and all that. So that's, and so he just got his canonization the same day. Wow. So that was that's clearly political. All the people that said, no way I'm voting for John Paul unless I get my favorite pope in. Well, okay, deal. And they both became saints. I've never heard of Montmorency Laval. or Marie of the Incarnation. Don't know who these are, but you could look them up and you could see the church is like billions of people, and you have all these folks out there that basically demonstrate that they're willing to give up everything for a life dedicated to Christianity, to Jesus, to not having stuff. And I can tell Pope Francis is on his way. I mean, he doesn't even wear the red shoes, you know, and he carries his own luggage and drives a cheap car, pays his own hotel bills. Everybody says, "Oh, this is, you're supposed to have a big retinue, and all these cardinals come up and pass the bill to the bishop, and the bishop passes it down to the, and then, have the slave girl sign it, No, they don't have slave girls. That was a joke.
Who are nuns?
Okay.
And moving on from that topic. Thanks, John.
Moving right along. So Duns Scotus doesn't have sainthood yet. I can't see him getting it anytime soon. Because, how many of you have heard of Duns Scotus before? Oh, no. Oh, well, some of you have cheated and gotten your BA in philosophy already. So that's all right. Kat has her BA in philosophy, which is why she's going back to school for psychology. You don't mind me pointing that out. She's actually still interested in finding work, and so.
Saying all those things that they told us about. There's all these employers looking for people in philosophy. Really?
Don't laugh too hard. Hey, I found work in the United States Army. Although I have to admit, the clerk looked at me and I told him I have a master's degree in philosophy, and he looked at me and he said, "Oh, is that like an associate's?"
Yes, with a bigger bill.
But that was okay. You put the right number of years down, and that's actually all that counted in the military, is how many years of schooling did you have. And that automatically put me on the fast track for E4 and all that other stuff, which worked. So 1266 and 1308. I'm going to write this down, because when we start comparing these, uh-oh,
Oh boy, he's got to keep track of a marker again.
it's one green one. That's terrible. It's green.
There's a classroom just catty corner that has like a basket full of them if you want to go steal a couple.
Well, let's see how it looks. 1266. You can see it, I guess. So 1308. November, so cold month. So, what's the C stand for? Circa 1266?
Mm-hmm.
So they're not actually sure. So how old would that have made him? Let's see, so 34 and 8? Am I counting that right? 34 years
So
plus 8, so
42?
42? That's done. Scotus. So let's double check. So this is 1280 and 1349. much longer. So 69, right? And that's William. By the way, if you've ever seen or read the book The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco, William of Baskerville, the character who's the monk in The Name of the Rose, have you ever seen it? Anyone seen the movie? I'll show you the trailer.
Within these walls, men come to seek God. He has come to seek a killer.
We found the body horribly mutilated. Under a window which was found closed. Somebody took you.
A man of reason in a world of blind faith.
Yes, small blood here.
You mean that he committed suicide?
Elementary.
And a crime that could not be suppressed.
Ink stains. He did not write with his tongue, I presume.
I don't like this place.
I find it most stimulating. Should we tell him?
No.
I am most curious to see the library for myself. May I do so?
No. But what if he should learn it of his own accord?
Written with lemon juice. Hey, who's there?
You overestimate his talents.
This one, I grant you, did not commit suicide.
When he is challenged by a man of cruelty and power, the hunter becomes the hunted.
Brethren, if you please!
The matter has occurred of the utmost gravity.
Had someone else not chosen to look in the wrong direction, several men of God might still be with us. Our monks will meet their deaths here, and they also will
Sean
have blackened
Connery.
fingers and blackened tongues.
His fang is black, just as Brother William foretold.
Yes, I was right.
He knew, just as I too would have known had I been the murderer.
You will not breathe. Lock them up!
One final murder has been planned.
Master? Master? How do we get out?
With some difficulty.
And it's his. Sean Connery. F. Murray Abraham. The Name of the Rose. A story of unholy murder.
So Umberto Eco, if you're aware, just died recently, and he was an Italian philosopher. He doesn't look like that anymore because he's dead. But he's a postmodern philosopher and author, and writes a lot of philosophy books that are kind of interesting. He wrote Heidegger and the Platypus. It's one of his funnier philosophy books. He also wrote an absolutely beautiful book. He was hired by the Louvre in France, in Paris, to write kind of a special book about their artwork, and he ended up titling it An Infinity of Lists, and it's really a beautiful book. It was expensive too. because by kind of giving you a tour of the Louvre, and it's a descriptive tour, so as he shows you the various paintings, he also gives you this ongoing explanation of the art. It's fantastic. But he's also written lots of novels, and Name of the Rose was the very first one, and it was a big hit, became a movie with Sean Connery, so he became famous. And that kind of author, whenever he writes a book, even if it turned out to be like crap, everyone would buy it and discover, gee, this one's crap, you know. But they would find, you know, so lots of intriguing books. Mondolino, the Prague Cemetery, lots of, but they're weird postmodernists, and so what happens is you've got all this kind of interweaving literary stuff going on, and so puns and things that you have to know the literature to catch the pun. So it's pretty interesting. Well, The Name of the Rose is the same way. So Sean Connery's role is actually William of Ockham, except that instead of officially being William of Ockham, even though it's actually kind of historical, he's actually William of Bakersfield, which was the road, I think, that Sherlock Holmes lived on, right? So you've got this blend of Sherlock Holmes. Notice the one line was elementary, which you know is a Sherlock Holmes line, you know, as he's basically using logic to figure out, like the guy that was mysteriously murdered, by being pushed out of a window that was closed, actually had jumped from a different window and by leaping went over that way. So he had leapt out of an open window and not out of a closed window, and William figures that out, etc. You know, so it's really a lot like Sherlock Holmes, except that it's in the Middle Ages in this monastery where all these murders are occurring, and there's all kinds of other elements and everything. So it's a neat kind of detective novel in the mysterious monastery, which was a real historical monastery, although not the one that it's called. And by the way, in the movie, they actually built a fake monastery for the movie. Kind of neat. But there was actually a monastery that was like that had a library like that. Kind of amazing stuff. So Umberto Eco actually did like a historical study of what the monasteries were like, the monks that were keeping the books alive, because remember the mice were eating the books faster than they could copy them, because the mice liked the books more than people did. Which is why the mice in the Secret of Nim were so smart, because they had read all those books while they were eating them. But in any case, you end up with a very interesting movie, very interesting book. The book, of course, is much better, much more detailed, especially about the library. It's fascinating how, because we have libraries that have numbers on the books, so you just type in the book you want, find the number, and you walk right to that spot and pick it up. Well, guess what? That's based on either the Dewey Decimal System or the what's the Library of Congress catalog system called? I forget. But so it's a numbering system they're both modern. So you think, wait, how did the monasteries with thousands of books keep track of where they were and everything? And how many of you are planning on reading the book or watching the movie? Actually, if you're going to watch the movie, it won't come up.
The Name of the Rose?
The Name of the Rose. Mm-hmm. The library is based on a geographical layout. So if the book came from Africa, it was in a section that was under Africa, so it's kind kind of intriguing. You know, how did they actually keep the books arranged so that they could know where the particular book was? And the book that causes all the problem is actually a book written by Aristotle that's actually really missing, and that's kind of interesting. So it's book 2 of the Poetics, which, well, I won't tell you anymore because I don't want to ruin it for you if you're going to watch it. But so the intriguing thing is this is William of Ockham, so if you're familiar with the movie or the book, this is really a historical look at what William of Ockham was like, including the problems he had, because he's in trouble, and the reason he's in trouble is because he's a rebel. Some, as I said, refer to him as the first Protestant, because he was protesting the Pope. And if you do that, and they have the stake, they have, torture machines. He was tortured. And by the way, once you're tortured, your health is not in really very good shape. So one of the reasons he died might not have been the plague. It might have been just his health was not in very good shape by the time, because he had been in prison, had been tortured for his beliefs, and they let him out and he fled because he still believed what he believed, even though it was what got him in trouble. And then he helped people in another community and died there. I believe. I don't think they know where he's. What? So that's the best answer, but I'm not, and that was a decade ago. Ockhamstrasse in Munich? That's a totally different place. So they might have memorials to him in a lot of places, but I'm not sure they really know for sure, however. So what's the two main differences between them, other than that William of Ockham was born later and lived longer? Duns Scotus was a Platonist, and William of Ockham was an Aristotelian, which means that Duns Scotus was for the pre-Aquinas point of view regarding the beliefs of the church. So basically keeping to St. Augustine. Whereas William of Ockham, as an Aristotelian, was a nominalist. So if we go nominalism. Ockham champions nominalism, which is the view that universal essences such as humanity or whiteness are nothing more than concepts in the mind. But remember, Duns Scotus is a Platonist who believes just the opposite. He's a realist and believes that only the universals are real. So you get the idea. These two are opposites, metaphysically. And since Aquinas is the one that basically solved this problem, they're, by basically denying that Aquinas solved this problem, keep the problem still in contention, right? So there's a couple of interesting things that's neat about this. One, that people are still taking sides. So monks will tend to be one side or the other and even argue with one another in various places. And the arguments that they take still go in the old traditional now scholastic debate style, which is yes and no, sic et non. So if you look up it's just Latin for yes and no. Notice the original text by that name was written by Peter Abelard, who we mentioned when we talked about Abelard and Heloise. But so this is a pattern, and that's essentially the pattern that Aquinas uses. Remember, in all of the Summae, he has the objections, objection 1, objection 2, so those are all the no's, basically. It depends on which way you want to go. And then he says, on the contrary, and they have the yeses or the no's, depending on which way you want to go, right? But I say that, right? And his answers, remember, usually are a way of blending both of those opinions by pointing out that under these contexts, this is the right thing to say, and under these contexts, this is the right thing to say. The one thing he doesn't say, which we would say today, is that the only wrong thing to say is that because you like the one side, you would say the other side is wrong, right? So the trick is being open to multiple contexts that determine the meaning depending on that context, so that you can basically agree with both sides without being confused. And you aren't, as long as you understand both sides and you see how that works, right? The trouble is that there are folks out there that will be confused, especially if you talk as if you agree with both sides and they don't understand how the context can make it different. So you get those kinds of folks that literally are confused by how you can agree with both, because it makes it look like you're talking out of both sides of your mouth or disagreeing with yourself, which, by the way, all continental Europeans do. Because this is really a common way for Europeans to think today. The deconstruction, postmodernists, the whole point of understanding that language is embedded in various contexts, and then I can say there, and there, and actually mean three totally different kinds of things, more than that, actually. Because there, spelled T-H-E-R-E, is different than T-H-E-I-R, which is different than the contraction T-H-E-Y apostrophe R-E, right? So you got lots of different contexts for utterances, and the meanings could be different in all those different contexts. And so, in a sense, Aquinas is open to the fluidity in language and how meaning changes from one context to another, which is a really very modern point of view. You might say that this is the first opportunity we have for that, right? But the thing is, that was difficult for people to understand, and as a result, you still have people taking sides and not understanding how you could say both. Now, it seems odd to say that Duns Scotus was incapable of understanding both sides. I somehow feel like certain that he understood Aquinas, and that his disagreements with Aquinas were much more complex. So if we look at Duns Scotus, I keep wanting to. See how well this works. I doubt it's going to work very well. I'll try it and see what happens. Okay, it looks like it's in Latin, isn't it? But it's going just the opposite direction. I was trying to make it larger. Oh well. So let's not read it in Latin. But I would like you to see a section of his writing. I'm not having any luck. It's like reading modern physics, though. Quiddity. So thisness is quiddity.
Is what?
Quiddity. Here they're saying whatness, or what it is. Notice in the other text it was thisness. What makes it what it is. The essence. Which is why when I saw a bottle of water for sale in Walmart that was, it was like a whole set of different flavors. And one of them was essence of peach. Another one was essence of cherry or whatever. And one of them, which was plain water, was titled Essence of Water. And I was like, yes! This is, I mean...
And it was like $3, right?
I don't know. I think it was $1.50. It was pretty cheap for any Vital Essence, that you could find. But I bought it, and I have it at home in my shrine to special things because it's essence of water. That's just, it's full of thisness. It's quididitas. That's.
So when they talk about the essence of it and like what its whatness and what it is that factually speaking, or is that just, I don't want to say spiritual, but.
Well, normally, when we're talking about a particular object, we might be talking about its use, how I'm using it, what I put it there for, where it is. I mean, we have lots of different things we could say about the object. But when you're talking about the quiddity of the thing, you're talking about what makes it it, the thisness of the thing. The essence of it being that. So that's not whether it's cold or damp or dirty or clean, or it's that it's H2O with nothing else in it. It's just the thisness of water. Right? No flavors. It's just the essence of water. Right? It's not chlorinated or any of those other weird no softening chemicals, no flavorings, nothing strange. Just hopefully it's not all I've had it now for I guess about a year, and I'm hoping that the plastics in the bottle do not penetrate the essence of water, because I wouldn't want to lose the essence. So this what philosophy can do to you? I don't know. So the irreplaceable thisness. It looks like somebody was having some kind of a daily meditation. Someone was meditating on the thisness of something. So I don't know what's going on. But if you ever get the chance, why are we not finding this is one of his books, so it ought to be there. It's a downloadable PDF. On the Will and Morality. Does it look like there's more pages? How do I get to more pages? You want me to buy it? Can you imagine? Title page, cover, preface, preface. Okay. So here I am reading a brief excerpt of the content. And this is obviously in English. The will and intellect is a science called speculative or practical because of its end, which in that case I'm sure is the purpose. Preliminary notions. We must first consider the generally accepted fact that practical knowledge extends to practice, because knowledge that remains within the intellect alone is theoretical knowledge. Also note that praxis, which is practice, right, or practice, is an act of some power or faculty other than intellect that naturally follows as an act of knowledge or intellection, and is suited by nature to be elicited in accord with correct knowledge if it is to be right. To begin with, praxis or practice is the act of some faculty other than intellect, because practical knowledge extends to it and does not just stay with itself. It is also naturally posterior to intellection, for it must have some relationship of order to an act of the intellect. Hence, acts of the generative or nutritive potencies, that's growth or ingestion of nutrition, right, which have no such order to the intellect, are not practical. Now, you don't concentrate on growing or absorbing nutrition. There's no intellect involved. That's kind of interesting, right? You never, I mean, you do think about what you're going to eat. Should we buy the kids pizza with pepperoni, with anchovies, with cucumbers? No, you can't have cucumbers on a pizza. Etc. Well, you get the idea? This is Aquinas. You have to pay attention to and see how he's reading. This stuff is like 2 or 3 times more difficult to follow than Aquinas. Is that easy to see? I mean, you could read lots more, and you get you'll see. It's actually beautiful to read and try to follow, because it gives you a sense of just how complex the late scholastics were. And that's also why so many people made fun of them, because as they were looking at the complexity of how, of course, what they're trying to do is almost like being a lawyer, being excruciatingly detailed about the contract or something. So today we make fun the same way but not of Duns Scotus. We make fun of the small print in contracts, especially those you get from like Google or Facebook or something of that sort, where you never read the 28 pages, the millions of lines, I'm thinking of the one senator that was interviewing, questioning Mark Zuckerberg, and said, frankly, this agreement sucks. And everybody laughed. No one ever reads the agreement. That's a joke. Actually, I have checked it, and if you do a word search and you look up firstborn child, you actually promise your firstborn child to those companies when you sign those contracts. So if you use Facebook or Spotify or what you're actually promised. You have promised your firstborn children to those companies. Fortunately, they've never actually come and requested the children that you've promised them, because as soon as they do that, the hilarity involved in by the way, you also promised them the first sardine out of every can. Yeah. Have they ever asked you for that?
I got some cans of some very old sardines.
Yeah, well, when you open them, you're supposed to give them the first. Kitty, I've never read the contract. Are professors supposed to tell jokes like that, make it sound serious? They are. So, quiddity. Let's look at something that William of Ockham. Oh, okay. The main thing that William of Ockham gives us that we can talk about is his razor. It's known as William of Ockham's razor, but it's also referred to as I'll think of it. It's also a principle. The principle of
Parsimony?
Parsimony. Thank you. Gosh, her mind is still clear. Mine. Maybe I have had too much brandy over the last few years. I don't know. Principle of parsimony, also known as William or Ockham's razor. And there's a great line that Ockham's razor has frequently been dulled on Plato's beard. So, when we look at Duns Scotus and the kind of Platonism in scholastic realism, I mentioned that in the one question on the test, if you were interested in that, and what's the difference between realism in the medieval ages and modern period today. Realists will say this is real, but if you're a medieval realist, no, it's not. The only thing that's real about this is that it's woodness and its podiumness. Those are real because those are persistent throughout all time and space. But Occam's razor has frequently been dulled on Plato's beard because Plato actually has a lot of good points. The essences of things really do exist. It's just confusing to us because they don't exist in the same way that a physical object does. But they really are real. They persist through our socially constructed reality. So even in modern times, universals puzzle the heck out of us because we know they exist. Same thing with virtual reality. A lot of people say, oh, virtual reality, it's fake, it doesn't exist. And yet when you put on the goggles and you're walking down a virtual reality scene, did I show you some? I think I showed you some. So if so in this particular case here, I'm looking at, so this is Nova Scotia. I'm just kind of cruising around Nova Scotia. Trees, you see the Atlantic Ocean out there, houses, etc. Okay, this is, let's keep track of the layers here, because you're looking at a digitally projected screen of an image that is a computer file on YouTube that I uploaded from my computer, where I saved the image with this camera.
Let's go to the beach.
Watching my computer screen, which was not actually looking at Nova Scotia, but was looking at a digital image from Google Earth Virtual Reality. How many multiple layers do I have here, right? You know, but I presume that this was originally a satellite picture or photo. This is a satellite picture still, right? So you can tell no one's on the ground taking this picture. I'm looking at this like now I'm on the ground looking through a camera, right? But you get the idea. So we call this virtual reality, but where do you come off saying, no, this doesn't exist? That's wrong, because you can see it. It's here. I'm looking at something. Our problem is, this is an unusual kind of something that we haven't had around for very long, and we haven't figured out yet what it is that we've got here. We've got to create a new kind of vocabulary to talk about it. And so a lot of people feel like it's nonsense, it doesn't exist. Well, that's dumb, because how else can we all look at it, right? So we've got to come up with a vocabulary that says it is real, but it's not real the same way that this room is, right? So that's what we're in the process of trying to do. And by the way, they're clearly in the process of trying to figure out, and still we're trying to figure out, what are universals. It clearly is the case that we have just families, genre, species, things of kind of a universal nature that we use with very good results in order to do biology, to make comparisons between various types of things. We know that genetics is important in this, because when we find a cure for someone with a particular medicine, but we give it to 10 people, 1 or 2 of those people end up with bad results from it. And what we know is that there's some other universal category that we need in order to make sure that we figure out what it is and can test who's got it, so that we can avoid making some people sick with a pill that will cure other people who look an awful lot like the other people, right? So we've got to find out what the essence is, the vital essence that's different between those 2 people and the other 8, all of whom have hemo something or other, right? They all have this, but you can't give them all the same medicine, because it will kill these 2 people, and we need to know that extra difference there so that we can create a subspecies of whatever in order to protect them, right? And that's the kind of thing that we feel like we're always going to find new stuff about, we hope. That's how the field of medicine and science improve things. Is this fun? This is totally new, which is one of the reasons why I like the movie and the book Ready Player One, because it's playing with this whole concept of how this is all going to work out. And one of the main themes in it that one of the main characters, the scientist, keeps pointing out, remember that reality is the only thing that's real. You come out of this every once in a while, especially if life really sucks for a lot of people. But you go into this virtual reality and everything is absolutely wonderful. The temptation to just stay there and miss living a real life is very real. Another way of using the word real, right? But there's got to be some sort of balance. I could easily see that as I get older and end up with less mobility and things of that sort, that I will find even more fun using a device like this where I could sit in my nice, comfortable living room and go to places. I just recently went to Quebec. It was absolutely fascinating, and it's like I'm going around the streets. It's almost like except that I'm not freezing to death, because Quebec is a cold place, at least most of the year, I guess. I'm looking at all these buildings just as if I were standing there in the street. Pretty darn amazing. I mean, especially with my eyes, I would probably be seeing it better through the quality camera that the person used to take it than I would be. I was looking. Plus, I could go back multiple times. So, this is going to be more and more useful. And by the way, I can also imagine it being part of class. Eventually, I can imagine, and we're almost using this already to some extent, you will not have a physical classroom where you come and sit in a seat and have to watch a physical goofy guy telling you about Duns Scotus. Instead, you will be at home where you can be making pizza and watching the kids and doing your class by watching your goggles where your avatar is sitting in a seat next to another avatar, everyone will be avatars, and the ugly guy will be an avatar. So it's like, and it won't have to be someplace where like a gunman can come in and shoot us all. Because we'll all be in our separate places, right? And that means that it's free, except for the bandwidth and the goggles, etc. I mean, that's where the expense will be, right? But if everybody already has those as like a requirement for being a member of the university or even the grammar school, right? Everybody would be home. We won't have buildings that we're supporting where students actually have to be transported to, etc. So we won't have that cost, right? Plus, the professor will be able to use more fancy devices than this in order to make sure that everybody's getting a good education. Plus, your goggles software will not allow you to say foul things, because as soon as you say it, it will automatically quelch it so that the rest of the avatars sitting in the room can't hear you say whatever, right? In fact, you'll get demerits automatically. It'll pop up on your screen and say, 3 demerits because you used a foul word in class. You're not allowed to use that. You know. And if you start, well, I don't want to, you can sleep. It's okay. And if you start to fall asleep, it'll wake up. You're not allowed to fall asleep.
A little electric shock.
There will be all sorts of modern controls in the thing. And making sure that you're behaving. And all sorts of. The imagination is the limit, really, on all this. And of course, what we've discovered is the more we have great imaginations and we develop something, then someone has more imaginations. So it'll be just incredible. And work will be the same way. You won't have to travel to places. Already today we have people meeting online rather than in face-to-face meetings. Why travel to Iowa City to meet 5 other ugly people to discuss why our products aren't selling? That's because you forgot to put them on the shelf, you idiot, Oh, we left them in the boxes? Oh, sorry about that. No wonder they're not selling. Okay, go back. That's how many boxes of stuff that you didn't sell is the cost for that transportation to Iowa City. Not to mention that you get the red-eye flight, which means that you're sitting next to somebody who's throwing up on you. And the baby's next to you that's, you pick up the baby in the diaper. It's so full, that you realize, wow, when they say 10 pounds maximum, they're not kidding, That's a Jeff Foxworthy joke. So, how did that come up? All of that. Occam's razor says that all things being equal, the simplest answer is the correct one. So if the simplest answer solves all the complex problems associated with it, and you've got this possible answer and this possible answer, this one is the simplest, that's probably the right one. It's not a guarantee, but that's what the Occam's razor essentially stands for, right? So it's the principle used to justify many conclusions. So that's way cool. By the way, this is really a principle that's accepted by a lot of scientists. One that you could always hold up in this respect would be Einstein, who thought that if the answer looked way too complex, it clearly wasn't the right answer. Had to be simpler, right? That's something that Einstein kept going for, is finding a simpler answer to it. He's using Occam's razor in doing that. Does it actually get dulled on Plato's beard? Yes. Sometimes the problem you're dealing with is complex. In fact, that's one of the beauties of a lot of the stuff that we do today, is that we recognize things like why, if you've got 10 people that are all dying of something, I could give them a pill, it will cure 8 of them and kill 2 of them. How does that happen? Well, there's something more complex that I'm missing in their genetics. There's something in these 2 people that I just killed with the pill that, indicates that there's at another level something I missed. So I have to be more complex. I can't be simpler. I have to be more complex, which today is why they're looking at your genetics before they give you a medicine. They want to find out more about your genetics because they know that it's at the genetic level that the medicines have to be tailored to the individual, right? So again, there you can clearly see that aspect of medicine has become more complex than it was. And that's Plato's beard, in a sense. Complexity, right? Is this fun? Meister Eckhart usually gets short shrift, 1260 to 1328. Is that right? I got that right?
1328.
So they weren't sure. 1328. So 68 years. Pretty interesting. Notice they call him Meister Eckhart. Meister is not his name. That's his title, Master Eckhart. That's all that means. German theologian, philosopher, mystic. So in some ways similar to Hildegard. By the way, there are other fantastic mystics that you could still read. By the way, we have our own Alaskan mystic, Thomas Merton, Are you familiar with him? I should mention him real quickly because the Catholic Church was having a special, I wouldn't call it celebration, but he actually died in Thailand, but he was here in Alaska for a while. So he visited several sites, including New Mexico, California, and Alaska, in search of a new potential contemplative site. He did die in Thailand in '68. So he arrived in Alaska on September 17th, but left for San Francisco on October 2nd. But I thought he was here longer than that. But so he was here for what, 2 weeks? I thought he was here longer than that. But in any case, they're having a celebration this year, and it's, I think, pretty soon. I don't know if you're interested or not, but you could probably see it in the Anchor, which is the Catholic newspaper here in Anchorage. So they will have like talks about him and everything, and he's published books that were very popular. The Seven-Story Mountain is, I think, the most famous one. But Meister Eckhart, but who else? Let's about something completely different. So this is when we also look at Machiavelli. Notice we're looking, about 100 years further on. Machiavelli, of course, is pretty famous. The main book that he wrote that everyone thinks about is The Prince, which were directions on how to run a government written for the Medicis. Cosimo, I think, was the main individual that he wrote it for. It was his employer. And what's amazing about it is that this advice basically says, do whatever you have to. It's very utilitarian in the sense that instead of having moral principles that reflect care and concern of individuals, basically you can murder them if it's good for the state or for control of the population. You can lie, you could cheat, you get away with murder of all sorts, but the main thing is success, keeping in power, running the government, and all that sort of thing. And the Medicis are famous for doing just this. Lots of individuals are poisoned, enemies of all sorts done away with. At least one of them was a pope. Does that make sense? Which one was the Medici that became the pope? I forget which one was a pope. Not Cosimo, I'm pretty sure. Machiavelli. So the Medici Pope was Clement. But once the Medici were out of power, political yin and yang kind of situation, Machiavelli was too. And that was miserable for him. He never ended up living off the fat of the land again. He was pretty impoverished, although still writing. And by the way, he wrote some other books that are so famous plays. So there are some issues about Machiavelli. Did Machiavelli believe in these kinds of, should I say it, Trump-like ruling principles, himself? Or did he only say that because he thought that's what the Medicis would respect and he wanted to get in good with them? We'll never know the answer to that question. But some of the other things he wrote were satires that made fun of those very people. So it is confusing. It's not like you could be sure that Machiavelli was clearly one way or the other. I do want to talk about Martin Luther, but let me see if we still got some music from the time period. So we haven't done much with this, but if you take music appreciation, one of the things I love, well, not that I would do it, but when you look at some of the original kind of musics that we trace back to primitives, still today we have contemporary primitives, and we can listen to their music, and it's very repetitive and beat-oriented, and can last a long time, and not very organized. It's just a repetitious beat kind of thing. And that keeps infiltrating or affecting modern musics too. So there's a constant feedback loop, basically, from those primitive musics, the Aboriginal musics and things of that sort. One aspect of it is that they don't have mathematics in the sense that the Greeks add to it with Pythagoras. So that's a significant change when you have the divided line, Pythagorean, you listen to the difference in Greek music, you end up with a note system that separates by a lot, really, the various tones. Now, if you listen to some of the music in between, like my favorite example is sitar music, you hear 12 pitches in between the tones in the Western music, so that you can get like a meow kind of sound that you don't hear in Western music, because the Western music is focused on that Pythagorean note system, which is actually codified by Ptolemy. Same guy that codified the planets, how the planets all go around the Earth and everything, the Ptolemaic system. Ptolemy also had a system that was also math-based to explain the music. And so when you look at that, it's pretty darn interesting. By the way, Galileo's father, Vincenzo, was in the Renaissance at the time where they disagreed with the Ptolemaic music system and began changing it over. But it was Bach that really changed it over with his clavier, the something clavier. What the heck? Well-tempered clavier. which is essentially what gives us the note system that we use today, including, bless you, how you tune an instrument for that modern system. So it's pretty interesting how we got that. What we're listening to here does not just have one particular musical line, but it has multiple voices that are blending with one another and creating harmonies. You hear that harmony? There's multiple pitches there all being sung together. When Ambrose, Bishop Ambrose, who was coincidental, of course, with Augustine, remember, he was the one that converted him and baptized him, and he codified Ambrosian chant for the church. They only had one melody line and everybody all tried to sing it. When Pope Gregory the Great codified the chant, updated it, you had a little bit more a melodic line in it, but you still didn't have any harmony. But what eventually would happen is you would get multiple voices, and along with those multiple voices, you would end up with harmonies. It's kind of interesting that when Bach wrote he was Lutheran, and the music that he wrote for them. This is one of my favorites. So when Bach wrote music, he was hired, by the way, specifically because he was conservative, and the music he would write was not going to be sexy. No sexy tunes. Even if Mrs. Bad Crumble wanted them. Nobody knows who Mrs. Bad Crumble was, right? Eddie Izzard? No. Okay, sorry about that. Joke that just went right out there. Sexy tunes. No sexy tunes in Bach, because he was going to be very conservative. Right? That was in his contract when he was hired for the Dresden. Amazingly, though, a lot of people today will tell you that Bach's music is very sexy. In fact, I think she's incredibly sexy.
I was about to ask if this was the video with the singer that you like.
She's the one I like. I think it's her eyes. Something in her eyes that just... She's the kind of wife that if you marry her, she will tell you what to do and you'll live long and prosper. So she's clearly Vulcan or something. But the amazing thing is, this music is incredibly beautiful, yet it was written for a church that was fighting against icons. They were iconoclasts. And if you notice, the church is completely white. They've painted over all the gaudy pictures that the Roman Catholics love, because those are considered sinful because they're too sensuous. So instead, they allow music that the Catholic Church would not allow because they thought that was too sensuous. Okay, you get the idea. So incredibly sensuous, beautiful music, after they've painted the church white to get rid of all the sensuous paintings. Catholic Church, sensuous paintings, no sensuous music allowed. No instruments. You're not allowed to play instruments other than the organ. I mean, at the time. That's obviously changed because people wanted guitars when I was in college. And of course, you eventually end up with things like Is that an English horn? You can see playing an instrument like that, what it does to your hair. Pretty amazing. Oh, just listening to that music does the same thing to your hair. Of course, the most famous. His hair is going the same route, but you can tell it's younger hair. So we went Bach, Handel. This is Haydn. KLEF's ad, by the way, says if
Your joy is Haydn, we can handle it.
if your joy is Haydn, we can handle it. It's a local classical music station, 98.1. So, this is kind of an interesting thesis. This was taught to me by Professor Cohen back in 1969, I guess. And that was that thanks to the Greeks, Western music split into a mathematically separated note pattern that, after about 1,000 years or so, ended up with harmonies developing. 4 voices originally, but then it becomes instrumental, and you end up with more and more complex interweaving of these. But if you go back to like sitar music and the Aboriginal music, you cannot get that same kind of interweaving of the melodies. So kind of interesting. The end result of that being more complex and more complex, obviously using larger and larger groups of well-trained people to do it creates amazing results. And that's Haydn. And then we have slightly more complex. And by the way, Mozart and Beethoven are the 2 that are considered to be absolutely the peak of this kind of music. Of course, it continues to get more complex, but at that point, the more complex music turns out to be harder to appreciate. So the odd thing, and this theory comes from a book by Charles Murray called Human Accomplishment, and he talks about that on all sorts of topics. But music, Mozart and Beethoven are tied just about, although he slightly puts Beethoven slightly above Mozart as absolutely the best. Uses an interesting quantitative analysis in order to come to that conclusion, which concludes that even in Japan, Beethoven is the best loved composer. By the way, not everybody agrees with Charles Murray. You think he has a bias? So Mozart, that was Mozart. Oh, that's awful. That's a terrible orchestra. Who the heck is that? Folsom Symphony in Sacramento. Oh. Let's we'll go to. Oh, no choral. We have no. I'm two. That's the first movement. But you get the idea. Obviously, music doesn't stay liturgical. It branches out and becomes this is interesting. This is an Asian orchestra that is absolutely gorgeous. I've seen them do some other stuff, and yet they're like just slightly above high school age. So it's kind of amazing. Did you hear that's not quite harmonic? So that's one of the things that more modern composers did to get themselves a little distance between that and the greats, is they started doing things that were against the rules. They're against the rules because they don't sound right, but they got away with it because, well, they got to do something. Last one. I'll stop. This is addicting. Then we'll take a break.